So where do we begin? How are we going to find the person who committed this crime? Obviously, we could look at the results of any forensic tests, we could talk to eyewitnesses and so on. But forensic tests take time and don't always provide a conclusive result. They might only provide part of the information you need, and eyewitness accounts are not always available. Now, obviously, in our case, we have some eyewitnesses, and we will return to consider eyewitness evidence shortly in a future episode. But let's start by trying to identify the suspect from what we know about the crime itself. This is called offender profiling, and one famous example of profiling is in the case of the Washington snipers. Between the 2nd and the 22nd of October in 2002, 10 people were murdered and a further 3 wounded in Maryland, Virginia, and in Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. All victims were shot at a distance with a single rifle shot, and every time the killers disappeared in amongst the confusion that resulted. The shootings appeared random. They took place in grocery store car parks, at petrol stations, while victims were mowing their lawns or sitting reading a book. There was nothing to link the victims. These shootings appeared, for all intents and purposes, to be random. Now, understandably, these shootings caused fear and panic in the community. The pressure was on to apprehend the culprit, but for investigators, there really wasn't that much to go on. Eyewitness accounts were few and often contained conflicting information. The media was incredibly interested in this case, and many were called on to give their opinion as to who it was that was committing these crimes. Those who commented ranged from forensic psychologists to criminologists, to homicide detectives to self-taught and FBI-trained criminal profilers. Now, these publicly available profiles, while far less detailed than would be developed for use in a typical case, give us a unique opportunity to look at what the profiler said the culprit or culprits would be like. And we can compare these descriptions with the known characteristics of those who were subsequently caught and convicted of these crimes. So, if we limit ourselves to just those profiles provided by self-professed profilers or FBI-trained profilers, we can see there's some inconsistencies in their comments. So on the topic of who is the sniper, Pat Brown, who is a self-taught profiler and author, stated on CNN on October the 11th, 2002. So at this stage, 9 days and 9 shootings into this spate of criminal activity.
This guy is a psychopath. He's involved in power control, and he might like Rambo movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger, anything that gives him the feeling of power that he controls the universe.
5 days later, on October 16th, 2002, Candice DeLong, a retired FBI agent and field profiler, was quoted in the New York Times as stating the following.
I see him into all this stealth ninja stuff, walking around with a swagger, used to bossing people around, maybe a fireman or a construction worker.
So here we are starting to get a picture of what the perpetrator is like, and note that both suggest that it's a single person who's committing these crimes. We're also starting to get a hint of their possible occupation. Greg McCrary, a former profiler and instructor at the FBI Academy's profiling unit, is quoted in the Washington Post on October the 23rd, the day after what turned out to be the final shooting, as drawing on the demographic makeup of the Washington region to suggest the following.
When you break down the demographics of the Washington region, there's a statistical probability that the sniper is a white man.
Now, in terms of the geographical location of the perpetrator's home, Robert Ressler, a former FBI profiler, commented on CNN on October the 18th, 2002, that
it is clear that this individual, and in my opinion these individuals, were going to stay in the major metropolitan Washington area, which tells me that they're residents. These people are long-term residents.
Now note, in this profile, Ressler makes it clear that he thinks there's more than one person involved in committing these crimes. And this is different to the assumptions made by Brown, DeLong and McCrary in their profiles. Brown publicly disagreed with Ressler and said on CBS on October the 22nd, 2002,
I have surmised from the beginning that he probably lives in somewhere about 3 miles from the Olney, Maryland area.
So from these few excerpts of the many profiles offered by trained and self-taught profilers, we can see that there are inconsistencies. The same information has not led to an agreed-on perspective of the probable characteristics of the offender. For example, in this case, the profilers cannot agree if it is a single individual or multiple people, or indeed where that person or people are likely to live. And in fact, when you consider those caught and convicted of these crimes, that is John Mohammed, a 41-year-old Gulf War veteran, and 17-year-old John Lee Malvo, an immigrant from Jamaica, you can see there are some other issues in their profiles. For example, the assumption made on the basis of the ethnic makeup of the Washington region was that the perpetrator would be white. They were also not firemen or construction workers, and no comment was ever made in regard to their love or otherwise of Rambo movies. So why the mismatch? Well, perhaps we've biased our sample by only showing you those profiles that got it wrong. It's a possibility, but there is nothing to suggest in the many articles and books that have been written on the subject that an accurate profile helped apprehend the suspects. Rather, it seems that in this case, that a phone call from someone claiming to be the shooter that linked these crimes to an earlier shooting where a fingerprint had been found and had been kept on file was actually critical in solving this case. Maybe the profiles offered differed because of the point at which they were made. That is, they were all made at different points in the sequence of shootings, and possibly more information about the characteristics of the shooter or shooters emerged as time went on. And this is certainly true. But there was a startling consistency in the way that these crimes were committed, the modus operandi, if you like, that didn't seem to evolve over the course of the crime sequence. It's also fair to say that at this point in time, these were unusual crimes, and so profilers, like the police, really didn't have that much to go on. It's hard to comment on what a perpetrator who commits this sort of crime is going to be like when you don't have instances or examples where this sort of crime or this type of sequence has been seen before. So now let's consider how profiling in perhaps more typical crimes might assist in investigations.